Good morning, students. Today's topic is restoration ecology, the emerging discipline. This topic is for MSc second year students, second semester students in their paper Natural Resources and Management. So there's a brief description about restoration ecology in Unit 3. The content of this presentation would be introduction, need for restoration ecology, options in restoration, then what is reference ecosystem, 10 hypotheses for restoration, process of restoration, components of restoration, and finally how we can measure the restoration success. So these contents would be dealt in detail in this. So, friends, what is ecology? It's the study of the interaction among organisms and their biophysical environment, which includes the both biotic as well as abiotic component. Restoration ecology is a very important branch of ecology these days, which deals with the maintenance of structural and functional diversity of the habitat or ecosystem or any landscape. So, now restoration ecology, this is the scientific study supporting the practice of ecological restoration. Restoration ecology is the process of assisting the recovery of an ecosystem that has been degraded, damaged, or destroyed, relating with the recovery of ecosystem health, integrity, and sustainability. This restoration ecology field as a field, it emerged in 1980s itself. So it's relatively very young science, developing science. Restoration ecology as a scientific discipline is theoretically rooted in conservation biology. So the principles of conservation biology are applicable in restoration ecology also. Then, ecological restoration can be defined, it's an attempt to return a system to some historical state, although the difficulty or impossibility of achieving this aim is widely recognized. A more realistic goal may be to move a damaged system to an ecological state that is within some acceptable limits relative to a less disturbed system. In this sense of the term, ecological restoration can be viewed as an attempt to recover a natural range of ecosystem composition, structure, and dynamics. On the other hand, restoration ecology is the discipline of scientific inquiry dealing with the restoration of ecological systems. The simplest restorations involve removing a change and allowing the ecosystem to recover via natural ecological processes. Succession. There are a different school of thought which says that you just put minimum efforts and then leave the system, it will regain its lost vitality through a natural process like succession. More often, however, restoration requires multiple efforts because multiple effort changes have pushed ecosystems beyond their ability to recover on their own. So, in that case, we cannot rely or depend directly on the succession only. We need to have some interventions. In some cases, restoration work is never finished as some level of maintenance is always needed. For example, in wetland, which is dominated by invasive species, you need to keep monitoring that. You need to keep removing those invasive species. Otherwise, that would not be of any use. Ecologically, restoration can be applied at the level of ecosystem, habitats, communities, species, water, or soil quality, or some other ecological characteristics of degraded or damaged area. Ecological restoration then becomes a tool for ecological research to support conservation and sustainable development efforts. So, what is the need for restoration ecology? Why do we need to go for restoration? Because you know that these ecosystems have become so damaged in these recent years due to man-made or natural or anthropogenic disturbances or climate change. The ecosystems, the landscapes have lost their vitality, and you also know that the species loss every year, to if you go into the back, you'll see many more species are being lost every day, and ecosystems are being hampered or lost. 60% of the world's wetlands have disappeared since 1900. So now the time has come when we need to look into the matter urgently and do something. So, what are the options available to us in restoration? You know, there are multiple options, right from restoration to rehabilitation, remediation, reclamation, replacement, mitigation. So, let us discuss about these in brief. What does restoration mean? It can be defined as it's an act of restoring to a former state or a position to a perfect condition. So in restoration, the end point is very, very important. You have to achieve the for perfect condition or a former state. Rehabilitation, it's an act of restoring a thing to a previous condition or status. But something that is rehabilitated is not expected to be in as original or healthy state as if it had been restored. So, uh, in rehabilitation, you know, it's a very simple thing that can be said. It's an action of restoring a thing to a previous condition or status. This appears rather similar to restoration, but there is little or no implication of perfection. So, in rehabilitation, perfection is not looked after, but the process is important. Then, remediation, it's simply an act of rectify, to make good. Here, the emphasis is on the process, not the end point. Then, reclamation, the making of land fit for cultivation. Reclamation is generally used for soil, soil, reclaiming the soil, but there is no implication of returning to an original state, but rather to a useful one. So, in reclamation, you can reclaim the soil and start growing some vegetation over it, and finally, over a period of time, you can make it to a useful one. Replacement, I think it is most appropriate, or it can be achievable. Replacement is simply to replace or to provide or procure a substitute or equivalent in place of. So, you know, it's a possible alternative uh, option available in restoration. And then mitigation. Mitigation is a word often used when restoration is talked about. Mitigation is to appease. So, no, to appease, to make the situation lesser. So mitigation, although mitigation can be an outcome of restoration, but it is a separate consideration. So these are the options. You can talk about them in detail. The figure here, it shows that how a degraded ecosystem can be achieved through multiple options. For a healthy ecosystem, you need to have its ecosystem functions and structure intact. So, different options you can enjoy, you can utilize in restoration, then it will be easier task done. So now we come to the what are the reference ecosystem. Reference ecosystem, it is a it serves as the model for planning an ecological restoration project and later serve in the evaluation of that project. So what SER says, you need to have some reference. Without having a reference, you cannot, what's up to what level you have to bring that ecosystem, that degraded ecosystem. You have to uh, uh, work on that. So you need to have a reference. It consists of one or several specified sites. A reference is best, you can have the best reference by assembling multiple reference sites. Then you can come to a conclusion. Yes, this ecosystem should be up to this level. Then only vegetation would grow. So how you can define a reference ecosystem? Ecological descriptions and species lists of similar intact or historical ecosystems can be maintained. Herbarium and museum specimens can be taken care of. You can go and see the herbarium and museum specimens. By that you can have an idea. Yes, these type of species used to be present at that time. So historical accounts or oral histories by persons familiar with the project site prior to damage. You can have interviews of the people living there, what kind of ecosystem used to occur at that time, or some 50 years back, 30 years back, 20 years back. You can have a rough idea. Or then again you can have historical and aerial photographs, recent aerial photographs or ground level photographs. So with these help you can make your reference ecosystem. So what are the 10 hypotheses for restoration? These 10 hypotheses are very important hypotheses on which you can base your study. First is beyond one or more threshold of irreversibility, ecosystem degradation is irreversible without structural interventions. So you need to put in some intervention to bring back that ecosystem. Without having structural interventions, we cannot achieve ecosystem health. Second is the more threshold passes, the more time and energy will be required. That means the more, the damaged ecosystem to bring back to a healthy state, you will be requiring more energy and time, and of course, more costs. Without massive intervention, restoration will proceed only for as far as next highest threshold in the process of vegetation change or succession. So you need to put in massive intervention. Beta diversity and life forms ranges declines with ecosystem degradation. Although initially alpha diversity may increase because whenever a ecosystem is degraded, a single species always appears and that sprouts heavily and encroaches the area. So alpha diversity can increase, but overall beta and that gamma diversity that will decline. The loss of keystone species speeds degradation more than the loss of other species. So this point is need to be noted that loss of keystone species becomes more important. So we need to take care of that. The reintroduction of keystone species should accelerate rehabilitation. So you must facilitate. The ecosystem restoration gets facilitated by reintroduction of native species. So you must take care of that. Water and nitrogen use efficiency and nutrient cycling, times they decrease with ecosystem degradation. Diversity of soil biota and their compatibility with extent higher plants decrease with ecosystem introgression. Between a floor and a ceiling of a given phase of retrogression, resistance increases but resilience decreases. The rate of recovery in restoration is inversely, proportional to structural and functional complexity of the ecosystem. So, what is the process? How we should go about maintaining or restoring an ecosystem? First step is to restore soils and hydrology to some functional level. Then only we can move further. Then it will become conducive to the reintroduction of higher order plants and animals. We can rebuild the conditions of the habitats to closely resemble, initiate a self-sustaining process, introduce plants and animals, take care of threats of invasive species, then species succession. Then succession would bring into the forces that via natural process that would increase. So, what are the components of restoration? You know, components of restoration are very, very important, and in that sense, we can talk about no matter what type of ecosystem is being tackled, once the damaging process has been initiated or once it has been controlled, the intervention program becomes crucial in order to ensure the factors that are important in hindering the redevelopment of the ecosystem requirements. So basically, three matters will need attention: remodeling the physical aspects of the habitat, remodeling the chemical aspects, nutrients, and toxicity, replacing missing species or removing undesirable exotics. Like there are some interventions like acid land left after coal mining. It will only require liming. So you cannot go for any other aspect. You have to remove its acidity, and that would be done only by liming. If in this case you start reintroducing some species, it will be of no use. So acid land will require liming. Raw inert materials left to the soils will require nutrients. So if the soil is devoid of nutrients, you need to increase the nutrients into that. Otherwise, it will not be of useful. Lakes overcharged with phosphorus. That would require pumping. You have to pump out the excess phosphorus, or mud pumping is required, so that it becomes reasonably fine for further workout. Lost species, that would require reintroduction. If a particular species, keystone species, is missing, so you need to introduce some kind of species in that. So it is possible to restore the functions. It is possible to restore the functions. You know, you can do it because a forest can achieve its age structure in 500 years. 5,000 years it requires for original structure to come. But biological functions of a soil can be restored in less than 10 years. So, if you have that kind of things, you can do it. Then you can also use of natural processes in your ecosystem restoration. These harness to help restoration. Decides should be used wherever possible. Like they cost nothing in themselves. Their natural processes are way cheaper. Also, although they may require some cost initially, okay, to initiate, then they are self-sustaining because they originate from within nature. So they are self-sustaining. They can be used as a larger scale. They can achieve full restoration, but take a long time and need to be assisted. Then how to measure restoration success? The Society for Ecological Restoration International had produced list of 9 parameters. If you base your study on these 9 parameters and you go nearby to those 9 parameters, that means you are successful in achieving a goal. The first is similar diversity and community structure in comparison with reference sites. If the reference site and your site has similar diversity or community structure, that means that parameter has been fulfilled and you can go for that. Another is presence of indigenous species. You need to have indigenous species in your system. Another is presence of groups which are necessary for long-term stability. Another is physical environment's capacity to sustain reproducing populations. normal functioning, integration with the landscape, elimination of potential threats. Once you have eliminated the threats which are hampering the growth of your ecosystem or habitat or community, that means you are just about to achieve your goal. Then resilience to natural disturbances. The ecosystem should be resilient because ecosystem stability. There is resistance and resilience. Once the ecosystem has the power of resiliency, that means it can regain it on its own. That means ecosystem is healthy. And self-sustainability. So ecosystem is always self-sustainable. It has the components of biotic as well as abiotic components, and it is self-sustaining. So these nine parameters, they if you fulfill them, that means your ecosystem or your habitat or your community is has been successfully recovered. So these are the references, you can go with these references. So but before talking about this, you must know, if you have to go for a restoration process, three important things are in. First is planning. You must plan how much cost is required, what kind of resources available to you, and then implementation. Implementation part is very important. You have to prepare the site, you have to introduce some species, you have to remove some species, you have to have some interventions, physical, chemical, or biological. And third and very important is monitoring. Monitoring is very important. Unless you do not monitor your ecosystem or restoration site, it will not be able to achieve your goal. So these three things are very important. First is planning, then implementation, and then you have to monitor. Continuous monitoring is required. So thank you very much for kindly